What's up, everybody? I want to be thorough and explain all the events of the 1812 era for anybody that's never heard of it. And everybody that already knows the basics and wants to get to the really crazy stuff that I've never found anywhere else, then I'll put a timestamp on the screen and you guys can skip to that. This really all started with the 1783 Lockheed eruption. And this is all that happened in this time frame that any other source other than that magazine I'm about to get to lists. And a survivor from Iceland said those people who did not have enough older and undiseased supplies of food to last them through these times of pestilence also suffered great pain. Ridges, growths, and bristles appeared on their ribs, the backs of their hands, feet, legs, joints. Their bodies became bloated, the inside of their mouths and gums swelled and cracked. And this offed half of the cattle stocks and a quarter of the sheep and horse. The air and all the supplies were tainted. A few months later, Europe had a strange haze over the sky that made people have difficulty breathing. And this ash cloud absorbed the sunlight and the moisture, changing the climate for years, they say. But I've heard a lot of instances after eruptions where there's a dry fog and it won't rain, and the air is stifling and stagnant. This, in part, led to the French Revolution. Ships were moored in many ports, fog-bound, crops were affected, and it coincided with an abnormally hot summer. First-hand accounts say the sun at noon looked as blank as a clouded moon and shed a rust-colored ferruginous light on the ground. At the same time, the heat was so intense that butcher's meat could hardly be eaten on the day after it was killed, and the flies swarmed, so in the lanes and the hedges they rendered the horse half frantic. The country people began to look with a superstitious awe at the red, luring aspect of the sun. So all of this led to starvation, economic depression, civil unrest, and eventually revolution. This was even written about by Benjamin Franklin, a high-ranking Mason and close personal friend and ally of the French aristocracy. Franklin was notorious for attending orgies and houses of ill repute while getting hammered with his FM brotherhood. He was in America when this happened, and all of the so-called sophisticated cultures were very well connected at this time. That was the late 1700s. We're going to fast forward to the 1812 era and start with Tecumseh's eclipse and comet. Tecumseh was a famous Shawnee rebel against the United States Gov, and his name even means shooting star. They'd often name their children off of what they saw on the day of their birth. They give his birthday around 1768, so there was stuff going on in the sky at that time. Any questions to whether or not he was a real historical figure? There's all of these towns named after him. But 1806, there was a solar eclipse, and then in 1811, there was Tecumseh's comet that was visible for 260 days. So while this big comet was up in the sky, the New Madrid quakes happened. And they say that these are the longest, most destructive ever, but I've actually shown much more for the 1300s. But all that's covered up. But these were huge, and they continued from December 1811 through February 1812. The ground rose and fell, bending trees until their branches intertwined and opening deep cracks in the ground. Landslides swept down the steeper bluffs and hillsides. Large areas of land were uplifted, and still larger areas sank and were covered with water that emerged through the fissures or craters. It's a liquefaction. But this area was sparsely populated at the time and not many man-made structures. Huge waves on the Mississippi overwhelmed many boats and washed others high on the shore. High banks caved and collapsed into the river. Sandbars and points of islands gave way while whole islands disappeared. Only one life was lost in a falling building at New Madrid, but chimneys and log cabins were thrown down as far as Cincinnati, St. Louis, and many places in Kentucky, Missouri, and Tennessee. This whole area of Reelfoot Lake subsided between 1.5 to 6 meters, close to 20 feet. So this whole lake was created by this. This in eastern Arkansas sunk as much as 1.5 to 2.5 meters. Coal and sand were ejected from fissures in the swampland next to the St. Francis River. Large waves were also caused on the Mississippi River by fissures opening and closing below the surface. Additional uplift deformed the northwest corner of the Tiptonville Dome. This is reported to have rang church bells all the way up in Boston, so that's still a pretty good earthquake all the way up there, and it was felt as far south as Peru. These big events cause lightning from piezoelectricity, and then there were even reports of ball lightning being seen. Wow, I can't believe I've never connected these dots before, but I just saw this photograph showing what it did to the landscape, and all of the Ozark Mountains look that way. I've hiked all over these mountains, and there are all kinds of sinkholes and depressions and embankments, rock outcroppings, caves, and what's called shut-ins like this. And I grew up right next to Grand Gulf State Park, this huge sinkhole. This is the view looking down from standing up top. And, we used to go in that cave. It doesn't go very far, but there's a natural bridge with land still attached over a big, huge open cave. This used to be our smoke spot. But wow, I never thought about most of this was probably formed during that event. That's awesome. I'm going to have to shoot some video next time I take Ruckus out. But yeah, this was a level we can't even imagine today. Huge tracts of land sinking and rising and changing the course of rivers. That circle part that used to shoot straight through right here. All this while Tecumseh's Comet is in the sky. Comets are related with a lot of these events. And the events I just described were times 10 in the 1300s event and worldwide. That comet was even buzzing like a trumpet as it flew through the air, where 1812 was just the areas surrounding New Madrid. All of this happened, by the way, in the Dalton Minimum, a period of decreased sunspot activity. Some will dispute the very existence of sunspots, but if I had reinvented the telescope off of some old Indian texts, which Galileo probably did, I'd take a piece of stained glass and have a look at the most important life-giving, heat-giving object in the heavens. Even long before that, there's reports of sunspots so big that they could be seen with the naked eye. This is not the end-all be-all of cyclical disasters, but every time this is observed to happen, a bunch of crazy stuff pops off. Next on the list is the 1815 Mount Tambora eruption that caused the year without summer. And let me tell you, Indonesia is not the place to be during one of these cycles. I probably couldn't find it now, but I remember reading that Java, the island on the right, used to be connected to Sumatra and got split in half in a single event. Then you got places like Borobudur that were either buried in ash or found in rubble when Europeans first found out about it. They date this at around 1000 AD, but I think it was the 1300s just like everywhere else in the world. But Wired magazine reports that Mount Tambora was the largest recorded eruption in human history. It's the largest they'll let you know about. But within 4 years, the largest seismic and volcanic event happened according to some sources. Over 70,000 perished directly due to the event, and no telling how many from the after effects like in Iceland earlier. And wow, even Farmer's Almanac is telling people about GSM, which reminds me I got to get a new Rumble up because the scientists aren't telling the mockingbirds what they want to hear. This caused the year without summer, where a lot of people did starve, especially like American settlers at the time, and a lot of peasants in the cities, but the more well-to-do people just had to pay more money. Vermont, for example, saw a decrease of 10 to 15,000 people out of a population of about 215,000, so that's about a 5% decrease. A lot of livestock was lost, and they had to reinvent the velocipede or the bicycle again from old Indian texts, evidently. Those guys thought of everything. Even the character of Frankenstein was invented because Mary Shelley was stuck in a house during all these storms watching all the lightning. So this is all easy to find information. What's in here is the only place I've ever heard of all this stuff, and it adds to all that. But I wonder how many people have commented so far saying, nope, it's all fake. Probably not too many people, because people use this all the time to say that there was a complete reset 200 years ago. So I hope they realize that if this wasn't all written down, they'd know nothing about it. This magazine's been in continual print since 1828, and I doubt they ran out and got all of the copies off the back of people's toilets instead of just getting rid of these photos. But they could have. Anyway, we're going to skip forward. This journal was published in 18 1834, and they had just had a crazy meteor storm of the Leonids meteor shower. One observer calculates 270,840 meteors were seen at Boston. I think we got a math fan. They varied in size from that of the full moon to that of a teacup. Some of them were followed by a train of pale or bluish or reddish light, which in one particular case seemed to act upon the wind. In some cases, an explosion was heard, and a gelatinous substance was found in 3 instances where balls had struck the earth. I heard the Native Americans refer to this event as the Hakalugi meteor storm. The height of these phenomena varied from a short distance from the surface of the earth to a considerable elevation. In descending through the atmosphere, they exploded, and in some instances within 10 feet of the earth, and in others struck it. So they were actually hitting the earth. The weather, it seemed, was suddenly changed immediately before the display from warm to cold, accompanied by extraordinary transparency of the atmosphere. Calmness and frost succeeded to storms and intense heat. You see how expressive people's diction is in 1833? People today would say it was calm and cold, and then hot and stormy. But this eloquent writer is the primitive culture. The air was excessively electric during the display. Clothes and hair were visibly affected, standing up on end. Got a bunch of static in the air. The declination of the compass needle also was supposed to have pointed that way. All observers agreed that it was coming from the constellation Leo. The concurrent phenomena, things that are happening at the same time, are the sinking down of 1.5 acres of woods at Hudson, New York, a full 30 feet below the surface, and the occurrence of a trembling of the earth previously observed there. In Lynchburg, a fall of rain when not a cloud was to be seen, and a luminous appearance like the zodiacal light, the northern lights. So boom, right there, you got a bunch of solar activity, and the northern lights seen down in Lynchburg, Virginia. I seem to remember an article on that not long ago. He goes on to list cities all around the northern hemisphere that were seeing this. Also says the Great Quake of Kumana in 1766, they also saw the northern lights. Weakened magnetic field, cosmic rays, and big quakes. That's on November 12th. A short time before that, Arica and Techno in South America had been taken out by a quake of great intensity. Add to this also the occurrences of 1766, 1753, and 1754, and a connection is apparent between the meteors and the quakes. A year before all of that, November 14th, 1832, a similar display of meteors resembling the most brilliant fireworks was seen all over the south of England and in many parts of Europe. At that time occurred the quake at Bermuda, the eruption of Etna, and closely afterwards that of Vesuvius. At Brunk, the meteors were preceded by the appearance of an intense light in the sky that descended and was then drawn up into a globular mass. Then it expanded, and from it issued numerous meteoric stones. Now, here's a pretty crazy idea that I read in one of these journals, that these are electrical phenomena, and the stones are actually created and formed in the atmosphere. And if you think about the mainstream idea that heavier elements were supposed to be formed from supernova, those are both kind of on the same page. In January 1834, a couple months after the main one, a noise as loud as thunder was heard, and the heavens appeared in a blaze. A round body of fire was seen at Austerlitz and many other places. Gradually, it attained the size and appearance of the moon, increasing till it was as big as a house. It created great alarm. They were afraid it was going to hit them. Rays of light as bright as the sun came from it, so that the naked eye could not endure it. No meteoric stones were found, but there was an earthquake in Badan about this time. All the wells at Bain threw out a quantity of silvery matter with a foaming torrent that made the streets look like milk. Same thing during the Great Lisbon quake in 1755. Then on November 20th, the coast of Chile was being elevated by earthquakes. It was being lifted up by earthquake, and meteors were observed running along in the same direction as the shocks. During the same month, luminous balls of fire were seen in France of the size of the moon, followed by quakes at Heidelberg. And again, the aurora was seen by Captain Perry. Now, he states it is also well known that there were quakes all over the globe in 1783, the same year as the Laki volcano. If you look this up, it only lists the Calabrian quake, but he's saying it's pretty common knowledge that these were worldwide in 1786 or 83. Thunderstorms were also frequent, and hurricanes. On March 17th, 1783, a thunderstorm destroyed the castle of Montagnac in France, while the city of Kremnitz in Hungary was destroyed by lightning. He goes on to list dozens of examples, and it's all the same. Atmospheric phenomena, storms, shaking, and you name it. And here's the way I see all of this. If you look at the 1783 Laki eruption as the beginning of the Dalton minimum, which most places don't. They say it started in 1790 because of the sunspots alone. But he just listed the accompanying atmospheric phenomena, storms, and seismic events to the 1783, the beginning of the Dalton minimum. And then you jump forward to about the midpoint, and you've got New Madrid and the comet, and there was a series of about 6 minor eruptions, like 4s and 5s, leading up to the 1815 Mount Tambora. Then it seems pretty calm up till the 1833, everything that I just read. So it seems like the onset of the cycle is bad, the middle of it is bad, and the end is bad. And that's over the course of 50 years. And there's a lot of speculation that we're heading into a GSM right now, and we have been getting a lot of solar activity lately. But if Suspicious Observers is right about this being the 12,000-year geomagnetic reversal, then we probably don't have to worry about beginning, middle, and end. We're just going to go straight to the end for probably 99% of the world. But whatever, there's a million speculations on what the cause is and exactly what you call it and all this, and I don't care. I just know that it's happened in the past. And people say, you and your stupid 800-year cycle. I don't have an 800-year cycle. I've read accounts of other people that have an 800-year cycle. I've said flat out 100 times, I don't know what the cycle is to this. I know it's not a complete wipeout and reset of humanity every 200 years. It looks like this cycle happens about every 200 years. Maunder minimum, Dalton minimum, about time now. But these all happen to varied degrees. The worst out of all these fantastic events was famine. And you had maybe a 5% population decline. That doesn't even come close to being able to rewrite all of history and cover it up. But like I said, I'm not going to convince the people that can't rationalize and use logic. But I know there are people out there, get comments all the time, that got tricked by all this. And I think when sane, rational people see all of the evidence, then one version is a lot more plausible than the other. Anyway, hope you enjoyed it. Wow, that took a long time, and I still got to do some editing. Static out.